Do you know that sunrise follows sunset? And do you know that winter comes after fall? It was one Tuesday morning in January, some years ago, that my family and I packed our 5 suitcases, 4 black ones and 1 gray one, to come to Canada for work as an experienced IT auditor. We had prepared as much as we could, but did not anticipate what the temperatures below zero would be like. So I left the sunny Caribbean island in a yellow t-shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers, and arrived at our destination in Canada at around 10:32 p.m. that night. When the airport doors opened, it hit me right in the face. It was the minus 30 degrees wind chill, and snow was everywhere, on the cars, on the buildings, on the trees, on the road. It was the very first time seeing this white stuff and this new environment to call our home. So after the results, assessing the results and this design and operating effectiveness of IS audit controls, companies have better understanding of what it takes to have a successful audit. Some have said, Michael, thank you for your work in helping us to understand. So welcome to this free training on how to increase your IT audit skills in financial reporting. And you'll learn the 5 audit areas that challenge new managers to perform better financial reporting audits. And what we'll discover in this webinar is to easily assess the appropriate design and of your information systems control to improve your communication skills among data custodians and to identify areas to limit your risk of cybersecurity issues. So these are the 5 areas that we want to discuss today: IT governance, password configuration and management, user access management, program change management, and computer operations. Now, when we look into IT governance, there are some particular policies and standards that we want to look at, namely the information security policy, the password standard, access control policy, the change management policy, data backup and recovery policy, and incident policy. Let's look at the information security policy. It's the starting point of an effective information security control. And this document consists of high-level statements from senior management of the security controls to be implemented to meet business objectives. One thing that the new auditor, or the new manager rather, should know is that it should be clear and concise. Changes that occur in the business environment on a regular basis should therefore be reflected in the policy and reviewed on a periodic basis, at least annually, to adjust for these changes that impact the business objectives. Organizations may adapt information security framework to provide guidance, such as NIST or COVID. And of course, this document should be approved by senior management, and the date that the review was done should be documented in the policy as well. The password standard is what we'll look at next. It is derived from the information security policy It contains statements such as should or must. It has the password composition, what it should be, minimum password length. Usually it would define it as 8 characters, minimum password age of 1 day, so that the user, when they change their password, they keep it for at least 1 day. Maximum password expiration, 90 days, and password complexity enabled. Now, when we look at password complexity, it is 3 of 4 characteristics: lowercase letters, uppercase letters, digits or numerals, special characters, and the use of passphrases. The use of passphrases is something that is being pushed by NIST right now, and it is a way to have passwords that are longer than 8 characters and you will be able to remember them. It could be a sentence of your favorite song. It could be a sentence of your favorite activity. Just something. For example, you could have, I like to eat vanilla ice cream, and you can interchange lowercase letters, uppercase letters, digits, and characters. But at least it would be something that you would remember, and it would be longer than 8 characters. And this is real difficult to break. So the password standard states which application, operating system, or database or network it applies to. There are some legacy systems that are exempt from the password standard, and usually there are exemption waivers that are signed by senior management and reviewed annually. Now, the fact that there is an exception waiver for these applications that do not enforce the password standard does not mean the risk is removed. It only adds a band-aid for auditing purposes, but the risk still exists and must be addressed by the senior management team of the business. A complement to the password standard is the account lockout policy. And this usually states the number of failed login attempts, usually 3 to 5 attempts, the lockout duration, which means it usually should be set at locked until the administrator unlocks it, and the reset lockout counter, usually 30 minutes. Now, the business should take into consideration whether or not they want to increase the number of help desk calls to reset the password. In this case, the duration of lockout could be changed depending on the nature of the business. Sometimes we want to have the administrator unlock the account, and one should be cognizant of this feature. So we have dealt with information security policy, we have dealt with the password standard, and now let's look at the access control policy. So it defines how access is granted to information systems. It tells who authorizes the access. Usually an approval matrix is appropriate in this area so that you know who approves which access for which application, for which system, and so on. The access control policy also shows or should state the removal of access to the system. How long does it take to remove access? And it should usually say 24 hours, because you do not want someone that has been removed from the organization to have access that is lingering for more than 24 hours. So 24 hours is really the best practice right now. And if you have a more critical environment, it can be reduced to much lower. So change management is the second most important audit area after password management that a new manager need to be skilled in. So let's look at that. It defines how program change requests are made. So formal communication of change requests via email, change management software, and change requests form is usually used in this area. And with the current remote setup, change requests are done online. So in the policy document, should be a classification of change requests, that is normal change, a standard change, an emergency change. And all these changes should have some management approval of the type of change request, the tests that are done, and the deployment of the change. So another area is backup and recovery policy. And we look at that right now. So in this document, the frequency of the backup and the backup schemes should be stated. So some of the backup schemes could be full backup or incremental backup or differential backup or a mixture of these schemes based on the frequency. So we could have a daily incremental backup, and on the weekend you have a full backup or so forth. You should state the offline or offsite backup storage and the frequency of the recovery test. This is very important for this policy. So it does make sense to have backups and you do not have any recovery tests being done to ensure that you are able to recover from a business disruptive event. And in this section, we go to the incident policy, and we're referring to the data incident policy. Usually, these are the two most important items that should be in there that the new manager should be aware of. The service level agreement and the priority levels for different types of incidents. So some organizations have a service level target where the SLA are not, they are they are difficult to achieve. So they would specify a service level target, which is more acceptable to the business. So we have covered the first area being IT governance that the new manager should be aware of when doing the financial reporting audit. And now password configuration and management. So 4 areas we want to discuss: single sign-on authentication, direct application authentication, legacy application, configuration change monitoring. Now for single sign-on, what readily comes to mind is Windows Active Directory and the applications that use a directory service to verify users. That's what the general definition for single sign-on is. And for the new manager, they should have or should look at the configuration screen to show that single sign-on is being used. So the fact that the application is on the network does not mean that it is single signed on. It allows it is using single sign-on rather. So one should check the application configuration screen to ensure that single sign-on is being used by the application. Now for direct application authentication, the configuration screen of the password parameters should be checked. And there are some operating systems that integrate applications such as the OS 400. So even though domain users log on to the network, it does not mean that the application uses those network credentials. And there are some banks, some airlines that use OS 400 and the password configuration are integrated. And one thing to note, especially with the OS 400, there's a default password setting that are often not checked. So this is one area that the new manager should be aware of when they are performing financial reporting audits. Now, there are some legacy applications that no longer are supported by vendors, and the password standard cannot be enforced. But there are some solutions that I can think of that will help to alleviate this problem. So a terminal server solution such as Citrix could be set up to log user activities when they are using legacy applications. Now, there should be a periodic review of Citrix logs for violation of users taking advantage of other users' logon credentials. The network could also be segmented for these legacy applications so that they are in a secure enclosure or secure segment of the network from the other applications that have robust password rules. And one important thing to note is that during the configuration change management, it is important to note that once you set the initial password configuration based on the password standard, that triggers should be set on the system to alert on the change or the changes made from the baseline. And this should be documented, investigated, and documented for further review. So user access management is another important area that the new manager should note in the financial reporting audits. And specifically, we're talking about how users are granted access to the systems, how they are removed from the systems, how user access rights are reviewed, and the review of privileged user access, user activities. So let's dig into the user access granting. So the new manager should be aware that system-generated user listing is the best to use. So user access forms or email requests are usually what is submitted for access requests. And management approval should be evident for each new user ID on the listing. One thing to note is that the approval should be received before the provisioning of service or provisioning of the account on the system. And one activity that the new manager may want to do is to compare the date the user access request was approved and the date the system was granted, the date access was granted on the system. Now, when users are removed from the system, the configuration at the network level can be done with a predetermined date so that it is automatically disabled when the user finishes work. Access should be removed within 24 hours. That is both physical access and logical access. And downstream systems can be removed within 3 to 5 business days. But this is a caveat that it must be documented in the access control policy so that this can be acknowledged and approved. The user access rights review is usually predetermined during the year. Application owners usually request and verifies the user listing. And there is usually a time frame for the revalidation exercise, which also must be documented in the access control policy. So this activity is not something that is taking place right throughout the year. It has a specific start point and a specific end point, and that point at which to have the changes reflected, whether continued access should be had, or whether modification of access needs to be done, or removal of access. So all this activity should take place within the year so that it can be properly assessed. Now you have some users who have privileged access, and you want to ensure that the activities that they are performing are above board. So a review of their activities need to take place. So triggers could be set up on the sensitive transaction processes or critical database tables or records to capture these activities. Regular review activities of unauthorized users based on these triggers should be done, should be investigated and documented in management's review. So we have done the user access management section. So we have 2 more sections to complete: the change management and the computer operations area. Now, for change management, these are the important things to note: the change requester, the developer, the tester, and the implementer, the approval of test results, approval to migrate to production, emergency change and approval, and post-implementation review. Now let's begin. So for the change requester, developer, tester, and implementer, usually these should be separate persons doing each function. And the requester can also be the tester, but definitely the developer must not be the final tester or implementer. So the change requester usually are department users or IT support staff. So all changes or all tests for the changes should be approved. And this is where the end users come into play, where they would test the changes, and once they are satisfied, then the management of the user department signs off on the approval of those test results. And these test results are documented and approved by management. In terms of the approval to migrate into production, the tested version by the end users is the one to be implemented in production. So this goes without saying that management approval of the tested version should be documented and the tested version should be implemented in production. Now, there are times when you have emergency changes, and these emergency changes should have an approval as well. So after the business comes back to normal, after the changes have been implemented, there should be some after the fact approval that takes place, and this should be documented and be ready for review. Post-implementation review is something that is not normally looked at. So the new manager should look on this area. And this is the regular review of files or objects associated with recently changed program files. The Change Advisory Board should also review these changes to ensure that they pass through the change management procedures or the change management process. So we're at the final section, computer operations. So there should be some flags set up in the application to alert on errors while processing the data. The ability to change the flags should be restricted, and the data backup should be configured according to policy. And data restoration is possible should a business disruptive event occurs. Now, the flags in the application should be so configured to alert when something happens while the data is being processed. This should be documented in the incident management software and resolved according to the incident management policy. Now, note here, we didn't mention anything about the security incidents. Now, this can be incorporated in here, but for the purpose of this training dealing with financial reporting audits, we are sticking to the data errors that occur while processing and result in these incidents. Now, the ability to change the flags should be restricted to authorized persons. And now we're here at computer operations, the backup process. So data backups should be configured according to policy. So should be data daily, weekly, or quarterly. Could be full, incremental, or differential. So failed backups should be rerun the next day, and the backup job report retained for at least 1 year, so that if you need to go back and look at what was done, you can have a report that is at least 1 year to find the information. And this is a critical piece. Data restoration should be possible if a business disruptive event occurs. So there should be regular testing of data backups, and the results should be documented. It doesn't make sense to have data backups and you are not sure that the backups will be available when you need them. So restoration testing is very important. So we have gone through the 5 areas that the new manager should be aware of in performing financial reporting audits. So the next step for you is to connect with me via LinkedIn, and there's my LinkedIn handle, via email at michaelharrisonjm@msn.com, or better yet, michaelharrisonjm.aweb.page just connect. And I'll be happy to provide additional information for you to guide you on this journey of improving your skills in financial reporting audits. So the Thursday after I arrived in Canada, I went to the store to buy a winter jacket, gloves, and boots to outlast the winter. I believe this information in the presentation will help you better prepare for the financial audits. You have just received over 7 years of IT audit experience that has been abstracted to the essentials needed to be successful in financial reporting audits. So, if you and I, if we were having a private conversation, what 2 questions would you have for me? What would you like to ask me? What do you need help with? Send that in the chat, and I'll be happy to research and provide you with an answer. I hope that you have been informed and that you have learned something from this webinar. Thank you for attending and have a great rest of the day. Replay will be on demand shortly. Bye-bye.